Maybe I could make a case that because we're all interdependent, whenever I generate wealth, I generate it as a consequence of my interdependence with other people. I wouldn't be able to do it on my own. I'm dependent on the infrastructure. I'm dependent on the government, or at least I have the advantages that those things provide me. And so could I not make a case that if I've managed to accrue a substantial sum of excess capital savings, that it's reasonable for the rest of society to expect me to allow some of that to inflate away as a tax on my hoarding, as a consequence of the fact that part of my wealth is generated as part of a shared endeavor? Because, you could posit a wealth tax, right, that might address inequality so that there's a 2% wealth tax or something like that on fortunes over $500 million. And so they decay with time to restore that hoarded wealth back to the general community. What do you think of an argument like that?
The problem with using inflation as a redistributive method is that it actually unfairly works against the poorer people in society, because those that have wealth, you're talking about a wealth tax or that sort of happens through inflation, but the way that it generally plays out is those people who are wealthy, they don't store their money as dollars, they store it in assets, and those assets appreciate in value as a result of the inflation, whereas those people who are living on fixed wages, salaries, living week to week with a bank balance, because they're spending a larger proportion of their money on goods and services, they're the ones who are actually most unfairly targeted by inflation. So it actually has the effect of increasing inequality.
Why do you guys have any faith in the idea that there is actually measurable inflation? Because I don't understand inflation. There's a basket of goods and services. The price of them is calculated every year, but what's in that basket of goods and services seems to me to be a relatively arbitrary choice. I mean, what makes you think that there has in fact been objectively reliable inflation, say over the last 30 years, given, for example, that many manufactured goods and so forth have got dramatically cheaper? Now, I know housing in many places has skyrocketed, to a tremendous degree, but do you really feel that the currency has become corrupt? And what do you rely on to make that case? What data do you rely on?
As an economy gets more efficient, it generates more wealth that's passed back to market actors in the form of declining prices. So we're getting smarter at making chairs, smarter at providing services, electronics, all these things. But by printing money, you're basically stealing claims on that economic surplus and doling it out arbitrarily. So we could say another way to think about this is that the free market itself, as you've described, Jordan, it's a distributed computing system. So we all have our, 120 bits per second conscious attention span. You multiply that out by 8 billion market participants. That is the cognitive power of the free market.
Right. I want to emphasize that because it's such an important point, and it could easily be skipped over because, there are people who admire the ideas of central planning. And you think, well, maybe there's 40 people doing your central planning. And so maybe they're the smartest people in the world and they're doing your central planning, but they have to calculate on the fly a virtually infinite amount of information. If they don't have free market prices at their disposal, they have to calculate what metal is worth, what nails are worth, what labor is worth, what rubber is worth, what cleanup is worth, what nursing is worth, et cetera, and they have to do all those comparisons and they have to do those computations, and there's actually no way even technically of doing that. And the alternative is to distribute that calculation across a virtually infinite number of actors, or actors in the billions at least, and let every single person act as a computational device and sum all that. And that's what the free market does. It's not even in principle replaceable by a logical cognitive mechanism. I can't see how it is.
That's exactly right. It's not even possible that a centralized bureaucracy, a centralized computing model can compete with a distributed computing model of the free market. We could in fact say that the free market is a pure economic democracy. People are voting by buying and selling, and whatever price is generated on any given asset, that's effectively the truth of what it trades at. Any intervention on that, any regulation, any pricing czar as they had in the USSR, you move along that spectrum towards an economic tyranny, where we have now the arbitrary wishes of a few overriding what the free market democracy is selecting. And to tie this back to the problems with the dollar is, the dollar was gold. By the way, fiat currency never emerges on the free market. That distributed computing model never selects a fiat currency by itself. It's only when natural law is violated, when they step across the line of life, liberty, and property and say, I'm going to impose this technology on you or else. That's the only time fiat currency has ever emerged. And in fact, the dollar itself was just kind of a bait and switch. It was something redeemable for free market money, gold, that was then replaced with this compelled money. And again, if money is speech, we could say then that fiat currency is effectively compelled speech. It's the same thing. thing. They're forcing a language of value. They're forcing its use on you. If you boil it down to brass tacks, the US dollar today and all fiat currencies, they are mechanically, they're pyramid schemes. So pyramid scheme is a system of network marketing that's useful for enriching those in higher tiers at the expense of those in lower tiers. And you're constantly recruiting more lower tiers to enrich the top.